Ernie Rivers, 13, lived at 125 Rose Street in a 4-bedroom apartment in Newark, New Jersey. Ernie lived with his grandparents as his mother was in jail for shooting his father, leaving him non-communicative and depressed, and then his grandfather passed away. On May the 6th, 1961, Ernie was playing in his bedroom while his grandmother, Maybelle Clark, was doing housework, when all of a sudden a glass jar on top of a dresser crashed to the floor. Something had made the glass move by itself. Ernie had heard the crash from his room, but thought nothing of it. On May the 8th, Ernie and his grandmother were in the kitchen when 6 cups in the living room came off the hooks by themselves and crashed to the floor, one after the other. Then several bottles in the bathroom fell to the floor and shattered. A bottle of antiseptic that was in the medicine cabinet flew into the living room and landed on the floor. But when Maybelle walked into the bathroom, she found that the door to the medicine cabinet was closed. She then removed the remaining bottles from the cabinet and put them on the floor. Her neighbour, Yetta Mandel, came around, but Maybelle did not tell her about the incidents. As they were talking in the living room, a cologne bottle from the bathroom suddenly flew into the room and appeared to zigzag in the air before hitting the floor, and the air was filled with the scent of the cologne. Then Yetta observed the glass decanter move by itself to the edge of the refrigerator and quickly ran over to stop it from falling. It was at this point that Maybelle admitted to a neighbour what had been happening in the house over the past 2 days. As she was talking, a lamp in the living room abruptly shattered. After that incident, Maybelle and Ernie stayed somewhere else that evening. Maybelle did not want to report the incident to the housing authority, fearing they would not believe her story and would evict them. Their lives were suddenly in turmoil. In total, they tallied around 20 incidents involving plates, mugs, light bulbs, mirrors and other objects falling or flying around the apartment. One evening, Ernie was working in the dining room table and saw something move from the side of the stove. He then saw one of the pepper shakers from the top of the stove start to levitate before quickly floating across the room and landing beside him. Then a glass rose from the kitchen sink and crashed to the floor. They were confused and afraid. They again left the house to stay with their daughter and son-in-law, Ruth and William Harwood, in a nearby town, but only for a short time. Soon other residents in the apartment block heard what was happening at Maybelle's apartment, and some reported hearing unusual noises. On May the 11th, Maybelle's son-in-law William and another relative were visiting, when reporter Douglas Eldridge from the Newark News stopped by. As they were talking in the kitchen, a cup that had been sitting on the bookshelf suddenly crashed to the floor. The reporter said it was impossible for the cup to have fallen by itself. At the time, Ernie was by himself in the bedroom. Maybelle told him it was the 5th incident of the day. She told the reporter that a bottle of antiseptic and a light bulb had all crashed and fallen at different times throughout the day. Ernie described seeing a light bulb unscrew itself before crashing to the floor. The press dubbed the events of the housing complex Project Poltergeist. Paranormalists believe that poltergeist activity can feed on the psychic energy of adolescence, and 13-year-old Ernie seemed the likely source of the mischief. But Ernie insisted he didn't have a clue what caused them, but could have been carried out in an unconscious manner, as he did have a lot of pent-up stress and anger. Housing Development decided to open an investigation where the director of the Newark Housing Authority, Irving Leskovitz, was in charge of the inquiry. Irving was dismissive of any talk about poltergeist activity and said, "Pretty soon you'll run out of things to break." Officials examined the apartment and surrounding units and basement, believing there must be some kind of magnetism in the apartment. They found no evidence of trickery or physical cause for the invisible force before things got worse. News about the unusual activity reached a Dr. Charles D. Regge, who was assistant professor in the Department of Management at Rutgers University. Dr. Regge had a long-standing interest in parapsychology and attempted to find a way to interact with the poltergeist. Dr. Regge, 37, planned to come to the apartment to observe Ernie the night of May the 12th. Earlier that day, Maybelle was in the apartment with her neighbour Yetta when heavy iron flew into the room. Ernie was in the bathroom. When Dr. Reg arrived, Yetta described how the iron was in the air and the cord was stretched out stiff behind it, and described how the cover of a sugar bowl lifted up and fell to the floor. Maybelle described the large container of salt launching from a shelf into Ernie's back. Yetta said she, Maybelle, and Ernie entered the apartment and after switching on the lights saw a bookcase topple over and the TV overturned as Ernie entered the room. Dr. Reg ruled out any possibility that Ernie was playing a prank. As Ernie's Uncle William, Dr. Reg and Ernie were picking up pieces of a broken lamp, an ashtray jumped from the table, striking William's chin before flying into Maybelle's bedroom. As they were leaving the apartment and William was turning off the lights, William screamed when a salt shaker struck him on the back of the head before smashing against the wall. As they rushed to get out, an ashtray flew off the shelf. A few days later, a reporter from the Newark Star-Ledger and the assistant director of the NHA entered the apartment for further investigation, and they did not leave disappointed. They heard a noise in the hallway and watched as a pill bottle on a shelf flew and landed in Maybelle's room. They blamed Ernie, but then found him in his room and could not have been responsible. Dr. Reg believed the energy of the adolescent held the answers, so he asked Ernie to choose a target for the forces, and he chose a mustard jar that had laid on the kitchen table. 20 minutes later, while Ernie was in the living room and Dr. Reg and William were in the kitchen, the mustard jar left the table and moved over the heads of the two men, crashing against the wall. Dr. Reg noticed an oddity that defied physics. The jar seemed to shatter before reaching the wall. On September the 9th, Dr. William G. Roll, director of the Physical Research Foundation at Duke University and researcher and writer on paranormal subjects, visited the apartment for himself. On arrival, he learned that Ernie had been staying for a few weeks at his aunt and uncle's place, and no disturbances had been reported. So Dr. Roll asked Maybelle to bring Ernie back to the apartment so he could observe him there. When Ernie returned to the apartment, Dr. Roll regularly visited them. One day Dr. Roll was in the hall outside the apartment and heard a noise. An ashtray had hit the power button on the remote control, shutting the TV off while Ernie was watching it. Dr. Roll rushed into the apartment to witness an ashtray still moving on the floor while Ernie was sitting quietly on a couch on the opposite side of the room. Maybelle had grown annoyed with the investigation and told Dr. Roll and Ernie to leave the apartment. But Dr. Roll assured Maybelle nobody would come to any harm, but then the bottle struck him on the back of his head. The doctor looked across to Ernie, who remained calm and composed on the sofa. Ernie later revealed that the bottle had also struck him as he was leaving the apartment. Sending Ernie back to his aunt and uncle was now a matter of safety. Ernie later moved back into Maybelle's apartment, and in the coming months they were again terrorised by the poltergeist when the TV, washing machine, the refrigerator and kitchen cupboard were tipped over. Now desperate, Maybelle took him to the Newark police station and begged them to take him in to protect him, but they refused. They could do nothing unless he broke the law or was deemed mentally unstable. Maybelle took Ernie to various houses, but due to disturbances asked him to leave. Child welfare decided that Ernie should be removed from Maybelle's custody and placed in a group home. Dr. Roll then arranged for Ernie and Maybelle to visit the parapsychology laboratory at Duke University. As they entered the building and Ernie and Maybelle were walking down a hallway outside Dr. Roll's office, a book on Dr. Roll's desk fell to the floor. Poltergeist was still active, but it was now on laboratory territory. They were booked in at the Jack Tower Hotel. When Dr. Roll returned home, he received messages from Maybelle that things were now happening at the hotel. When Dr. Roll returned to the hotel, they said an ashtray had fallen and the glass smashed. While Ernie was in the bathroom, he saw the toothpaste float from the shelf to the bathtub. Then Maybelle placed a lamp on the floor to avoid breaking, but then the phone fell down. Ernie quickly grabbed the television to stop it from falling over. Laboratory observations began at the Duke Street campus on December the 18th, where even a parapsychology laboratory failed to inhibit the poltergeist. A Dr. John Altroci observed that Ernie tended to keep all his emotions, positive or negative, bottled up, to the point where they seemed ready to burst at any moment. That Ernie longed for a level of attention and love he was not given, considering all the losses of the last few years, where his father was murdered, his mother in prison, then his grandfather dying. Ernie also described the anger he felt after his father beat him as a child, creating inner turmoil, helplessness and anger. Ernie had lived through a childhood of extreme violence. The team examining Ernie came to the conclusion that the poltergeist experiences were connected to family turmoil as well as psychological distress and trauma, with unseen forces controlling him. After time in a foster home and a farm for foster children, Ernie's Aunt Ruth and Uncle William took him back to their home. With similar incidents of glasses and items breaking, over time they proved less violent than previously, and the incidents gradually stopped by the time Ernie turned 18 and joined the Marine Corps. Ernie remained in New Jersey and is married with children. The violent incidents slowly receded, but they occasionally experienced unusual phenomena in the house. With one in particular his wife never forgot. She woke in the middle of the night to glimpse what she believed to be a man sitting on their windowsill. Startled, she jostled Ernie to let him know what happened. Ernie responded as though he knew just what it was that she'd seen, and said casually, "Don't worry about it."